I should have known something was wrong the moment I pulled into our driveway and saw all the cars lined up along our street. The bass from whatever music was playing inside our house made my steering wheel vibrate. After a 12-hour shift at the hospital, the last thing I needed was one of Jackson's surprise parties. My name is Alara, and until that night, I thought I was living someone else's perfect life. Funny how quickly things can unravel. I sat in my car for a moment, still wearing my scrubs, trying to gather enough energy to deal with whatever waited inside. The living room windows pulsed with multicolored lights, and I could see silhouettes of people dancing. Through the kitchen window, I spotted Jackson holding court at our island counter. Throwing his head back in that theatrical laugh he saves for his business associates. When I finally dragged myself to the front door, the handle was locked. I had to ring my own doorbell like some unexpected guest. A woman I'd never seen before opened it, champagne glass in hand, looking me up and down with obvious confusion. "Oh," she said, "are you the help?" Before I could answer, Jackson appeared behind her, his perfect smile faltering for just a fraction of a second. "Honey, you're home early." He swooped in for a kiss, but I turned my head. His lips grazed my cheek, leaving behind the smell of expensive bourbon. "It's 11:30, Jackson." My shift ended right on time. He wrapped an arm around my shoulders, steering me inside. "Everyone, this is my beautiful wife. She saves lives, you know." He announced it like I was some party trick he'd been saving for the perfect moment. A few guests raised their glasses, but most barely glanced our way. I spotted her then, a tall woman in a red dress, watching us from across the room. Something about the way she looked at Jackson made my stomach twist. She lifted her glass in our direction, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Who is that?" I asked Jackson. "Oh, that's just Lila. New client." He squeezed my shoulder a little too hard. "Why don't you go change into something more appropriate? I'll have Miguel mix you one of his famous martinis." I pulled away from him. "I'm exhausted, Jackson. I just spent 6 hours in emergency surgery. A kid almost died on my table today. Come on, babe. It's important to network. These people could really help us dash." "Help us what?" "We have everything you wanted. The house, the cars, the country club membership I never use." A few nearby guests pretended not to listen. Jackson's smile remained fixed, but his eyes hardened. "Don't do this now," he whispered. "Not in front of everyone." I looked around at everyone, his carefully curated collection of business contacts and social climbers. None of them knew that I'd been up since 4 a.m., that I'd skipped lunch to hold a crying mother's hand, or that I'd had to tell a father his daughter might never walk again. "You're right," I said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "I should go change into something more appropriate. I wouldn't want to embarrass you with all this real-world mess." As I headed upstairs, I heard him smoothly explaining to someone that I was just tired and so dedicated to my work. The woman in the red dress, Lila, caught my eye again. This time, she wasn't smiling. In our bedroom, I found evidence that someone had been there, the covers slightly rumpled, a wine glass on my nightstand that wasn't mine. Next to it lay a tube of lipstick in a shade I'd never wear. I picked up the lipstick, rolling it between my fingers as the party continued below. The bass thumped through the floor, and I could hear Jackson's laugh again, followed by a woman's voice, high and musical. That's when I realized my perfect life was just another one of Jackson's carefully orchestrated performances. And I had been playing my part for far too long. I didn't call Finn right away. That would have been the sensible thing to do, but I spent 3 days pretending everything was normal. Going to work, making dinner, sleeping next to Jackson while that lipstick burned a hole in my dresser drawer. Sometimes denial is easier than facing the truth. It was Finn who finally showed up at my door, camera bag slung over his shoulder, wearing that concerned look he's had since we were kids. "You missed Sunday breakfast," he said, pushing past me into the kitchen. "Mom said you texted some excuse about picking up an extra shift." I busied myself making coffee, keeping my back to him. "I did pick up an extra shift." "Bullshit." I called the hospital. The coffee pot slipped in my hands, clattering against the counter. "You what?" "They said you called out sick." He leaned against the island, right where Jackson had been holding court at his party. "What's going on, Al?" I turned to face him, and something in my expression must have given me away because he straightened up immediately. "Show me," he said. Upstairs, I pulled out the lipstick and handed it to him. He turned it over in his hands, just like I had done countless times over the past few days. "Could be nothing," he said, but his jaw was tight. "Maybe someone left it at the party." "In our bedroom?" "On my nightstand." I sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted. "And there's more. A woman named Lila." The way she looked at him. "The one in the red dress?" When I looked up sharply, he added, "I've seen her around. At that coffee shop near Jackson's office." "What do you mean, you've seen her around?" Finn set down his camera bag carefully, the way he does when he's about to say something he knows will hurt. "I didn't want to tell you until I was sure. I've been documenting things. Just in case." He pulled out his laptop and opened a folder labeled Property Development Projects. Inside were dozens of photos, Jackson and Lila having lunch. Walking together, laughing. In one, they were sitting close in a booth, his hand on her knee under the table. "These are from the past 3 months, Finn said quietly. I stared at the images, feeling strangely detached. "Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed me?" He closed the laptop. "You've been defending him for years, Elle. The missed anniversaries, the business trips, the way he talks down to you in front of his friends." "I haven't been defending him," I started to say, but the words felt hollow. "I've been surviving," Finn finished. "Like we did with Dad. Making excuses, walking on eggshells, trying to keep the peace." The comparison hit me like a physical blow. Jackson's nothing like Dad. "No." Finn pulled up another photo. This one showed Jackson at his office, shouting at someone just out of frame. His face was twisted with the same rage I remembered from our childhood. The patterns are different, but the control is the same. I got up and walked to the window, watching our neighbor water her perfect roses in her perfect yard. What am I supposed to do? Just throw away 8 years of marriage? "No," Finn said, coming to stand beside me. "But maybe it's time to remember who you were before him. Remember that girl who used to paint until sunrise? Who had opinions and dreams and didn't apologize for taking up space? She grew up," I said softly. "She gave up. There's a difference." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from Jackson, "Working late tonight. Don't wait up." Finn looked over my shoulder at the message. "Want to know something interesting? His office has been closed for renovations all week." I thought about the lipstick in my drawer, the rumpled bedsheets, Lila's knowing smile. "Show me everything," I said. Finn squeezed my shoulder. "There's my sister." As he pulled out more photos, I felt something shift inside me, not quite anger, not quite grief, but a quiet determination. Jackson had spent years carefully constructing his perfect life. Maybe it was time someone showed him what it looked like when things fell apart. Following Lila turned out to be easier than I expected. Her routine was as predictable as Jackson's lies: coffee at 9, yoga at noon, lunch meetings that stretched well into the afternoon. What I hadn't expected was for her to notice me watching and walk straight to my table at the cafe. "You're not very good at this," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "The whole surveillance thing. I spotted you 3 days ago." I gripped my coffee cup tighter. "And yet you waited until now to say something." "I was curious how long it would take you to confront me." She stirred her latte, studying me with those calculating eyes. "You're different than he described." "How did he describe me?" "Fragile. Dependent." A small smile played at her lips. "Clearly, he doesn't know you as well as he thinks." The casual way she talked about my husband made my stomach turn. "What do you want, Lila?" "To show you something." She pulled out her phone, scrolling through messages. "Jackson isn't just cheating on you. He's been embezzling from his company, using me to cover his tracks." "I have proof." My hand shook as I took the phone. Emails, bank statements, photos of documents, all showing millions flowing through shell companies. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because he promised me a partnership. Instead, he's setting me up to take the fall." Her perfectly manicured nails tapped against the table. "I thought I was special." Turns out I'm just another chess piece he's willing to sacrifice. Why should I believe you? Check his office. Third drawer of his desk, there's a false bottom. The original documents are there. She stood up, adjusting her designer bag. Oh, and Ilara? He's meeting me at the lake house tonight. The one he told you he sold last year. I sat there long after she left, remembering how proud Jackson had been when he bought that house. Our weekend getaway, he'd called it. Now I wondered how many other women he'd taken there. The office was empty when I arrived. His secretary knew me, barely glancing up as I walked past with a spare key I'd never used. Inside his office, everything was immaculate, not a paper out of place. The false bottom in his desk drawer opened with a soft click. What I found wasn't just proof of his financial fraud. There were photos of other women, dating back years. Hotel receipts. A second phone. And at the bottom, a manila envelope with my name on it. Inside were surveillance photos of me, at work, with friends, shopping. Notes about my schedule, my habits. A half-finished divorce agreement that would have left me with nothing, dated 3 months before our wedding. My phone buzzed. Jackson, working late again. Don't wait up. I took pictures of everything, my hands steady despite the rage building inside me. Then I drove to the lake house. Their cars were already there when I arrived. Through the window, I could see them in the kitchen, Jackson pouring wine, Lila laughing at something he said. The same scene I'd witnessed countless times at our own home, now playing out like some twisted mirror image. I didn't interrupt. Instead, I sat in my car and called Finn. I need those photos you took, I said when he answered. All of them. And I need you to meet someone. Elle, what are you planning? I watched Jackson pull Lila close, kissing her the way he used to kiss me. Remember what Dad always said? The best revenge is making them destroy themselves. Yeah, but Dad was a bastard. Maybe I said, starting my car. But he wasn't wrong about everything. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of Lila watching me from the window, raising her wine glass in a mock toast. She thought she was playing me, but she'd just handed me everything I needed. Jackson had spent years building his house of cards. Now it was time to watch it fall. The last person I expected to find on my doorstep at midnight was Margot Fields. My mother-in-law stood there in her designer coat, clutching her handbag like a shield. We need to talk, she said, pushing past me into the house. And you need to stop whatever you're planning. I closed the door, watching her scan the living room with those sharp eyes that had always made me feel inadequate. I don't know what you mean. Please. She pulled out her phone, showing me surveillance footage of my visit to Jackson's office. Did you think the company wouldn't notice? My heart raced, but I kept my voice steady. Does Jackson know? Not yet. She sat down, her perfect posture a stark contrast to my exhausted slump against the wall. But he will, unless we can fix this. Fix what, exactly? The fraud? The affairs? Or just the evidence I found? Something flickered across her face, not surprise, but recognition. Sit down, Ilara. There are things you need to understand about my son. I stayed standing. 8 years of marriage wasn't enough to understand him? You saw what he wanted you to see. She pulled out an old photograph from her bag. A young boy with Jackson's eyes stood next to a man whose face had been burned away with cigarette marks. His father was creative with his punishments. The photograph trembled in my hands. Why are you showing me this? Because you're not the first woman he's tried to destroy. She took back the photo, her manicured fingers tracing its edges. There were others before you. Before Lila. Each time, he convinced himself they would betray him first, so he had to strike preemptively. And you helped him cover it up. I protected him. Her voice cracked, just slightly. The way I failed to protect him from his father. I thought about the divorce papers I'd found, dated before our wedding. You knew what he was planning to do to me. I knew he would try. She met my gaze steadily. Just like I know you're not actually working with Lila. The accusation hung in the air between us. I said nothing. She's playing both sides, dear. Always has been. Margot stood up, smoothing her coat. The question is, what are you going to do with that information? Why tell me this now? Because despite everything, you're good for him. Better than he deserves. She walked to the door, then paused. But if you're going to take him down, make sure you're ready for the collateral damage. Some secrets should stay buried. After she left, I found another photograph she'd slipped onto the coffee table. A newspaper clipping from 20 years ago. Local businessman dies in house fire. Foul play suspected. My phone buzzed with a text from Lila. Meeting tomorrow? I have more documents to share. I stared at the message, thinking about Margot's warning. About buried secrets and collateral damage. About a young boy with burned photographs and a mother who would do anything to protect him. Another text came through, this time from Jackson. Miss you. Coming home early tomorrow. Let's have dinner. I thought about how easily the lies came to him, how smoothly he moved between his different worlds. Just like his mother, playing both protector and enabler. My fingers hovered over the phone. Lila was waiting for my response, thinking she had me figured out. Jackson was probably at the lake house right now, not realizing his carefully constructed facade was crumbling. And somewhere, Margot was either trying to save her son or setting me up for an even bigger fall. I texted Finn, need your help. Bring your camera. Then I responded to Lila, tomorrow works. Same place. Finally, I wrote back to Jackson, can't wait. I'll cook your favorite. 3 messages, 3 lies. I was learning from the best after all. But unlike them, I wasn't playing both sides. I was playing my own game now. Sophie found me in my old studio, surrounded by dusty canvases and 8 years of abandoned dreams. I hadn't planned to come here, but after Margot's visit, I needed somewhere Jackson wouldn't think to look. Jesus, Elle, Sophie said, taking in the chaos. When's the last time you were up here? Our 2nd anniversary. I picked up a half-finished painting of the lake house. Jackson said my art was becoming a distraction from our marriage. Sophie moved closer, studying the canvas. And you believed him? I wanted to. I set the painting down carefully. Did you know about Lila? Her hesitation told me everything. I suspected. But you weren't ready to hear it. I'm your patient. You're supposed to tell me these things. You're my friend first. She touched my arm. And friends don't force truths that could break someone. They wait until that person is strong enough to face them. I pulled away, anger rising unexpectedly. So everyone just watched me play the fool? You, Finn, Margot, all protecting me like I'm some fragile thing that might shatter. No. Sophie's voice sharpened. We watched you grow stronger. There's a difference. She gestured at the studio. The Alara who gave up painting would have never survived what you're planning. I froze. What do you mean? Finn called me. He's worried you're going too far. She picked up one of my old brushes, rolling it between her fingers. Revenge isn't therapy, Elle. It won't heal what's broken. I'm not looking for healing. I grabbed a blank canvas, propping it on the easel. I'm looking for justice. Are you? Or are you trying to prove something? She watched as I squeezed paint onto a palette. To Jackson? To yourself? My hand shook as I lifted the brush. You didn't see what I found in his office. The photos, the plans, he's been orchestrating my destruction since before we got married. And now you're orchestrating his. The first stroke across the canvas was violent, red paint spattering like blood. He deserves it. Probably. Sophie moved to stand beside me. But you deserve peace more than you deserve revenge. My phone buzzed, Lila, confirming our meeting. Another message from Jackson about dinner. And a new one from Margot. Whatever you decide, remember, patterns repeat. I looked at the canvas, really looked at it. In my anger, I'd painted something dark and twisted, reminiscent of the burned photograph of Jackson's father. The same rage, different generation. I can't just let him win, I whispered. Then don't. Sophie handed me a clean brush. But win on your terms, not his. Not his mother's. Not Lila's. I stared at the brush, remembering how it used to feel when creating brought joy instead of pain. When art was about expression, not revenge. I have documents, I said finally. Proof of everything he's done. Enough to destroy him legally without destroying myself in the process. Sophie smiled. Now that sounds like the Alara I know. My phone buzzed again, Finn, sending photos from his surveillance of Lila. She wasn't just meeting with Jackson, she was meeting with his competitors too. playing every angle, just like Margot said. I picked up a new color, bright, defiant yellow, and started painting over the darkness. I need your help with something. Name it. I'm going to have dinner with my husband tonight. The yellow mixed with the red, creating something unexpected and beautiful. And then I'm going to take back everything he stole from me, starting with the studio. Sophie watched as the painting transformed, understanding dawning in her eyes. What do you need me to do? I stepped back, seeing the whole canvas clearly for the first time in years. Be ready. When I'm done, there won't be any going back. The painting wasn't finished, but it was starting to take shape, a phoenix rising from ashes, its wings spread wide and fierce. Not for revenge, but for rebirth. The dining room felt like a stage set, perfect tablecloth, perfect candles, perfect facade. I'd spent hours preparing Jackson's favorite meal, playing the role of devoted wife one last time. When he walked in, his smile faltered at the sight of his mother sitting at our table. Mom? He loosened his tie, eyes darting between us. What's this about? Sit down, darling. Margot's voice was honey-sweet. Alara made your favorite. I watched him calculate the risks, weighing his options. Finally, he sat, reaching for the wine. Should I be worried? About dinner? I smiled, serving his plate. Or about the board meeting tomorrow? The wine sloshed over the rim of his glass. What? The one where you'll have to explain the missing funds. I sat down, unfolding my napkin. Or maybe about Lila's presentation to your competitors? You've been talking to Lila? His knuckles whitened around the glass. Everyone's been talking to Lila. Margot cut into her meat with surgical precision. That's what happens when you underestimate people, darling. They surprise you. Jackson's facade cracked. You knew? All this time. I knew everything. Margot set down her knife. Just like I knew about the others. Just like I knew about your father's accident. The room went still. I looked between them, seeing the weight of unspoken secrets. You don't know anything, Jackson whispered. I know you started the fire. Margot's words fell like stones. I helped you cover it up. My carefully planned confrontation was unraveling. This wasn't about affairs or fraud anymore. This was something darker, something generational. He deserved it, Jackson said, his voice changing, becoming younger somehow. You saw what he did to us. And now you're doing it to others. I pushed away from the table. The control, the manipulation, the careful destruction of anyone who gets too close. He turned to me, and for a moment I saw the scared boy in Margot's photograph. I never hurt you. You just planned to. I pulled out the divorce papers from his office. These were dated before our wedding, Jackson. You were plotting my downfall before you even said I do. To protect myself. He stood suddenly, sending his wine glass crashing. Everyone leaves. Everyone betrays. I just beat them to it. Like you beat your father to it? The words slipped out before I could stop them. His hand shot out, not toward me, but toward the evidence I'd gathered, the photos, the documents, everything that could destroy him. But Margot was faster, snatching them away. Enough, she said. It ends now. You're choosing her? Jackson's voice broke. Over your own son? I'm choosing to stop the pattern. Margot stood, straight-backed and regal even as tears slid down her cheeks. I protected you once, and it destroyed you. I won't make that mistake again. Jackson laughed, a hollow sound that raised the hair on my arms. You think you have proof? That anyone will believe you. He pulled out his phone. One call, and everything you care about disappears. Your job, your brother's photography business, your precious little art studio. Make the call, I said quietly. Show us who you really are. His finger hovered over the phone. In the silence, I could hear the echo of his father's rage, see the legacy of pain passed down like a poisoned inheritance. I loved you, I whispered. The real you, not this creature your father created. Love is weakness. He pressed the button. I learned that early. My phone buzzed. A message from Finn. It's done. Everything's backed up. You're safe. But I didn't feel safe. I felt hollow, watching the man I married transform into someone I never really knew. Someone who could burn down his own life just to prove he was in control of the flames. You're right about one thing, I said, standing to leave. Everyone does leave you, Jackson. But not because they betray you. Because you give them no choice. As I walked out, I heard Margot say softly, like father, like son. The sound of breaking glass followed me into the night, and I wondered if some patterns were too deep to break, some wounds too old to heal. The board meeting erupted into chaos the moment Lila finished her presentation. I watched from the back of the room as Jackson's carefully constructed world imploded, spreadsheet by damning spreadsheet. "These allegations are ridiculous," he said, but his voice had lost its usual authority. "Miss Thompson is a disgruntled employee with a personal vendetta." "A personal vendetta?" Lila's laugh was sharp. "Should we discuss exactly how personal our relationship was, Jackson? Or should we let your wife do that?" Every head turned toward me. I stood, hands steady, and walked to the front of the room. "My name is Alara McKinley," I said, "and everything Miss Thompson has shown you is true. I have additional documentation to support her claims." Jackson's face twisted into something ugly. "You don't want to do this." "Actually, I do." I plugged in my USB drive, and new images filled the screen. Not just financial records, but photos. The lake house. The other women. The burned remains of his father's study. "What are you doing?" His whisper was desperate. "Breaking the pattern." The boardroom doors burst open, and Margot strode in, followed by 2 police detectives. "It's time, Jackson." "Time for what?" He backed away, looking between us. "Mother, whatever she's told you, Dash." "I told them the truth," Margot said. "About your father. About the fire. About everything I helped you hide." One of the detectives stepped forward. "Mr. Reed, we need you to come with us." "You can't prove anything." Jackson's composure cracked completely. "It was 20 years ago. You've got nothing. We have this." I projected one final image, a series of photographs showing a teenage Jackson buying gasoline, walking toward his house. Leaving just before the flames began. Your father wasn't the only one who kept detailed records. The room fell silent. Jackson stared at the evidence of his past, his hands shaking. "You don't understand. He was going to destroy everything. He said I was weak, that I'd never be strong enough to run the company. I had to show him, Dash. That you could be just like him?" I stepped closer. "You succeeded, Jackson. You became exactly what he made you." He lunged then, not at me but at the computer, desperate to erase the evidence. Finn appeared from nowhere, tackling him before he could reach it. They crashed into the conference table, sending water glasses shattering across the floor. "It's over," Finn said, pinning him down. "Let it be over." As the detectives moved in with handcuffs, Jackson looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. "I loved you," he said. "In my way, I did." "I know." I knelt beside him, just out of reach. "That's what makes it tragic. You loved me the only way you knew how, by trying to destroy me before I could destroy you." "Like father, like son," he whispered. "No." I stood up, backing away. "That's where you're wrong. You had a choice. You still have a choice." The detectives led him out, past the shocked board members, past Lila with her triumphant smile, past his mother who watched with tears in her eyes. At the door, he stopped. "The paintings in your studio," he said quietly. "I never really hated them. I was afraid of them. Of what they meant." "What did they mean?" "That you could create something beautiful without destroying something else first." He looked back at the wreckage of the boardroom. "I never learned how to do that." As they took him away, Margot touched my arm. "You could have destroyed him completely. Why didn't you?" I thought about the burned photograph, the scared little boy, the cycle of pain that had brought us here. Because then I'd be just another link in the chain. Through the boardroom windows, I watched Jackson being led to the police car. The morning sun caught his face, and for a moment, I saw him clearly, not as the monster he'd become, or the victim he'd been, but as something in between. Something human. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. "You okay?" I looked at the chaos around me, the scattered papers, the broken glass, the shattered remains of Jackson's facade. "No," I typed back. "But I will be." 6 months after Jackson's arrest, I stood in my transformed studio, surrounded by paintings for my first exhibition. The space that had gathered dust for years now burst with color, landscapes, abstracts, and one piece I hadn't planned to show. "You're really going to display that one?" Finn asked, helping me arrange the lighting. He nodded toward the portrait of Jackson as a child, standing in front of his father's burning house. "It's part of the story," I said. "Just not the whole story anymore." The gallery buzzed with opening night energy. Sophie had helped spread the word through her therapy groups, and several of her clients who'd escaped similar situations came to support the show. Their presence felt right, survivors understanding survivors. Lila showed up briefly, wearing Victory like an expensive perfume. "The company's mine now," she said, sipping champagne. Funny how things work out. I watched her work the room, wondering if she'd learned anything from Jackson's fall, or if she was just better at playing the game. Some patterns repeat in different ways. Near midnight, when most guests had left, Margot appeared. She moved through the gallery slowly, studying each piece until she reached the portrait of her son. "You captured him," she said softly. "Both versions, the boy he was, the man he became." I had a good teacher. I handed her an envelope. "He wrote this last week. Asked me to give it to you." Her hands trembled as she opened the letter. I stepped away, giving her privacy with whatever confessions or accusations Jackson had finally put to paper. Finn found me by the window, where my final piece hung, a phoenix rising from ashes, but with a twist. The flames weren't destroying it, they were transforming it, turning pain into power. "You okay?" he asked. "Getting there." I watched Margot wipe tears from her eyes, tucking the letter into her purse. Some things break clean, others leave jagged edges. Speaking of jagged edges, he nodded toward the door, where Sophie was leading in one last visitor. Jackson's prison uniform looked stark against the gallery's white walls. Part of his plea deal had included therapy, and Sophie had convinced the authorities to allow this supervised visit. He stopped in front of his portrait, studying it with the same intensity his mother had. "You made me look innocent," he said. "You were, once. And now," he turned to face me, thinner and somehow younger than I remembered. "Now you're just human." I moved to stand beside him. "Like the rest of us. I read about your work with domestic violence survivors. Using art as therapy." His voice caught. "You're doing what I never could, turning destruction into creation. It's not too late to learn." He smiled sadly. "Some fires can't be unlit." "No," I agreed. "But we can choose what rises from the ashes." After he left, escorted by guards, Margot touched my arm. "Thank you," she said, "for not making him a monster in your art. For seeing both sides of the story. There are always both sides." I looked around at my gallery, at the pieces showing darkness and light, destruction and rebirth. That's what I learned from all this. We're not just victims or villains. We're all just people, trying to break free from whatever cages we've built. The night ended quietly. Finn packed up his camera, Sophie hugged me goodbye, and Margot left with her son's letter close to her heart. I stayed behind, alone in the gallery that represented not just my rebirth, but my understanding of how complicated healing can be. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The paintings helped. "Jay." I didn't respond, but I didn't delete it either. Some stories don't end with perfect closure or complete redemption. Sometimes they end with small steps toward change, with the recognition that even the deepest wounds can teach us something about healing. I turned off the gallery lights, leaving just the security spots illuminating the phoenix. In the shadowed glass, I caught my reflection overlaying the rising bird, and for the first time in years, I recognized myself completely.